website. I'll put our website up too, as a reminder. We have a library of audio files of chants if you're kind of new to this and like a little assistance. So remind me at the end of the day to pop that up. But all of the chants here are ones that we do in our Contemplative Wisdom circles as well. So this one was already in the airwaves from the House of Prayer when I arrived there. It's got a little more energy to it, more words too, so it's helpful to have it up there. And I just want to give you permission. The original is for the one from whom all mercy flows. You can stick with mercy, it's a good thing. But you can also change it up if you like. So you might hear me saying, from whom all loving flows, or from whom all grounding flows. So feel free as we're chanting it together. If you're feeling inspired for another thing that you want flowing in the world, you can add it a little bit on this chant. And as I mentioned earlier, harmonies are also perfectly welcome as we're going along and you get comfortable. All right, so you ready to come all in online here, our heads and our hearts and our senses? Lovely. Believe that one, and maybe do it louder. There we go. Listen, listen, wait in silence, listening for the one from whom all mercy flows. Listen, listen, wait in silence, listening for the one whom all mercy flows. Listen, listen, wait in silence, listening for the one from whom all mercy flows. Listen, listen, wait in silence, listening for the one from whom all mercy flows. Listen, listen, wait in silence, listen for the one from whom all love flows. Listen, listen, wait in silence, listening for the one from whom all love flows. Listen, listen, wait in silence, listening for the one from whom all love flows. Listen, listen, wait in silence, listening for the one from whom all love flows. Listen, listen, wait in silence, listening for the one from whom all love flows. And once again, let's hold that contrast, that opposition between silence and sound. It's listening into however you're showing up this afternoon. So as I mentioned in the morning, we'd be holding this natural arc and the contours of our prayer lives in the morning, and then looking specifically at the ways in which imaging God, naming God, relating to God impacts our life of prayer. And I had an opportunity to share quite a bit of personal story, but I need to share some of the juiciest parts of the story yet. So we'll turn our attention to the work of God on our prayer this afternoon. And by way of entering into that, I'd like to share, it's kind of a guided meditation or a guided reflection that invites us to just think about metaphors for God. So in that big picture, conceptual, naming God way, and part of it here is to kind of unstick some of the things we might have gotten stuck in naming God in our own lives and our traditions. And so what you'll hear in this little guided piece is 4 M metaphors. And as you listen to them, I invite you to reflect on 2 things. The first just being, oh, I see myself in this thing she's talking about. So how have you noticed is relevant to your own relationship to God? And they're not on the sheets yet, so nothing's visible. This is a guided one. You're welcome to write if you'd like to on any kind of open sheet that you have. And then secondly, I'd like you to imagine which of these metaphors might motivate you to find that regular time in your daily life for getting to know God through prayerful presence. And so some of these metaphors will maybe resonate with earlier parts of your life, maybe later parts of your life, maybe something you went back to 4 times again. So feel free to play with kind of the seasons of life as we look at these 4 metaphors. So the first metaphor, the M metaphor, is that of a maze. So for some of us, our relationship to God is like being in a maze. We assume that we are made to please God by whether or not our actions and our choices line up with God's plan. At any point within the maze, if we make a wrong turn, we assume that we might be lost forever, sitting at the mercy of a God who sits somewhere above and on high, watching us carefully from a distance to see if we can guess what God's will for us is. In the maze, we may not entirely trust God, and we tend to focus mostly on our own actions as either right or wrong, often in our attempts to win over this distant on high God. So in the maze, our concern is about knowing the right or wrong path. We are focused on knowing the rules of life as set forth by God, and we are very careful not to mess up. We offer prayers such as, teach me from right from wrong, save me from going the wrong way. And we use prayer forms such as rote prayers, memorized prayers, devotionals, things that give us guidance. Related to discernment, so I think of discernment as deep listening and loving response to God. In the maze, for discernment, we listen for the voice of clarity, of right and wrong, and we respond through our faithfulness to the correct path. As part of our normal spiritual formation, the maze metaphor helps faithful Christians and seekers to discover and develop a solid moral life. We learn right from wrong, and that's a good thing. As potentially detrimental to development, especially if we get stuck or lost in the maze, I think of a young college man that I companioned when I myself was barely out of college, learning to be a spiritual director he seemed to get stuck in the maze because he was so concerned with the righteousness of his behavior that it actually crippled his ability to connect with God. For him, God was a distant, judging Father far away on the other side of an enormous gulf, an abyss, with whom it was best to maintain a safe and secure distance. Okay. So some common images of God in the maze: metaphor, a judging father, a stern mother, a protector, Santa Claus, right? That one who gives us the things, all right? So hopefully you're feeling some resonance or maybe some dissonance with the maze image. Let's sit with a second image here. The second M is a map. For some of us, our relationship to God is like navigating a map. We assume that we can please God as soon as we figure out exactly what we should do, and then follow a carefully planned route on our way to accompany God. We assume in the map that God is not actually with us until someday when we arrive at the carefully planned for place. In the map, we tend to focus again mostly on our own efforts as tightly controlled and planned out. I grew up as the oldest daughter of a single mother. Just saying. So in this controlling and this planning, it's attempts to prove our worth to a God who is always looking over our shoulder, perhaps in love, perhaps in judgment. So in the map, our concern is about knowing the plan to get there. And we're focused on getting there, and the way to get there is becoming in line with God's will and maintaining tight control over our lives. So we offer prayers such as guide me along the way, help me when I get off track. And we use prayer forms such as liturgical prayer for guidance, affective and imaginative meditation, novenas, Bible study, maybe some Lectio Divina in the map. And related to discernment, again, that listening to and responding to God, we're listening for the voice of the one who shows us the plan. And we respond then through our own initiative in being able to follow through with the plan. So as part of normal spiritual development, the map image assures us that God is in fact interested in us and that we can trust God for guidance. These are good things. As potentially detrimental if we get stuck somewhere on the map, I think of a young woman that I companioned as a spiritual director. She was in college, who had every day so tightly planned out, and the course of her life's trajectory already planned so well that there was no room for any surprises from God. She was so busy getting ready for God that she barely or rarely paused long enough to meet up with God. For her, God was for later or after I, ... fill in the blank. Right? I see some heads nodding, that feels familiar. So common images of God for the map: a savior, a lawgiver, a miracle worker, a God of mercy and compassion. All right? So, second M. Ready for the third M? The third M is the image of a mirror. The image of the mirror affords us an opportunity to gain a deeper sense of our personal identity in relationship to God. So the mirror is a common stance for youth and young adults when we start exploring vocational path, purpose in life. We humans have this very strong tendency to want to look out in admiration of others and God, goodness, love, truth, beauty, in order to then look back so that we can see that what we admire in God or what we admire in others is actually something that others can already see in us that's trying to grow, that's trying to take shape. I call this a spirituality of seeing in the mirror, right? So relationship with God as a mirror supports that spirituality of seeing and being seen. So with the mirror, our concern is about knowing ourselves. We're focused on becoming closer to God, perhaps with God as a friend or a companion who really knows the depths of who we are. We offer prayers such as "Be with me" or "Don't leave me." We use prayer forms such as praise and worship, Lectio Divina of daily life, imagination, meditation, acts of service for the common good. And once again, with that lens of discernment and listening to God and responding to God, we listen for the voice of loving affirmation and belovedness. Think of Ignatius's first week of the exercises, knowing that you are a beloved child of God. And our response is through our capacity to grow and to transform into the fullness of who we can become. So as part of our natural spiritual development, the mirror metaphor reminds us of God's desire for communion with all of creation, but especially in the form of deep love for each particular creature. Right. So potentially detrimental. I think of one of the older adults that I companion who's pretty comfortable by now, speaking frankly with God about all the things. And she has regular conversations with God in prayer, been conversing that way with God for quite a while. Yet, her conversations are still mostly one-sided, in which she does most of the talking and the informing and the checking in, and God is kind of, somewhere nearby in the house, but mostly acting like a coat rack where she can just kind of hang all her stuff, right? So we can get a little self-preoccupied if we're not careful in the mirror metaphor. So common image of God for the mirror then, loving Father and Mother, Jesus as friend, God the giver of gifts. Okay, maybe you can start adding some of your own images for God. We're on to the fourth one. I like to do things in 3s and 4s if you haven't noticed. Okay, so the fourth M metaphor is that of mystery. Mystery. Entering a relationship with a God of mystery allows us to name God using paradox as both intimate and ultimate. God as mystery prompts us to ask, how could I ever adequately explain the sense of a God who knows me so well as to know me better than myself? And how to explain a God who is big enough and always more than enough to overcome any problem or inadequacy that I in my finiteness could ever present to God. Being in relationship to God as mystery affords us the luxury of allowing our own lives to dynamically develop and unfold without the fear of making a wrong turn that might send me over a cliff and potentially end my life, or without the worry of never being enough through all my carefully laid out plans, ceaselessly attempting to achieve that impossibility of perfection. Encountering a God of mystery allows us to unfold in gracious spaciousness as we progress and refine in our spiritual journey. So our concern with the M metaphor of mystery is that we actually begin to experience some tension. I mentioned those holding opposites earlier. We experience some tension in our comfort and our discomfort with unknowing. We sort of learn to befriend ambiguity and paradox. Our focus is on becoming more open to the ongoing and unfolding nature, not only of God, but of ourself and of others, right? So we start to see all these layers. We tend to start offering prayers of self-emptying. So a lot of us are probably familiar with that fancy Greek word kenosis, right? The prayer self-emptying or offering. And actually our prayers begin to use fewer words, often in the metaphoric mystery. We use fewer, simpler forms for prayer. We tend to grow in increasing comfort with the discipline of repetition. So how many of us have been told, just show up on your pillow, even if nothing special or magical happens, it's just the repetition of showing up. And as part of the natural ongoing spiritual journey, the mystery metaphor teaches us that God is always bigger than us. We can bring both the good and the bad, the joy and the sorrow, and God can handle it all. A challenge for this period is dealing with the discomfort of letting go of certainty and security. Right? That's one of Thomas's teachings: affection, control, certainty, and esteem. Right? So the mystery metaphor encourages us to let go and let God in order to do the deepening and the widening work. So common images in mystery, as I said earlier, the images start to fall away. We might have this increased sense of loving union, presence, God as present in all things, everywhere, all the time. Okay, so hopefully we've been stirring a few things up for us. What I'd like to sort of conceptually present here as we look at these metaphors, there are a lot of assumptions and experiences that build up the truth of these metaphors, right? And so there's a spiritual direction teacher named Janet Ruffing who first taught me these concepts of your operational theologies and your espoused theologies. And that's what I'd like us to sort of experiment with a little bit today and reflect on. So, now that I've given us the little set of metaphors to kind of listen to our experience on, I'd like to take a few minutes, maybe just a couple here, and see if we can't think of our own images and metaphors. So if you take a look at the next set of handouts, you'll see at the top of it, it says Seeking God Through the Natural Shifts, Identifying Our Espoused and Operational Theologies. And so I just want to take maybe 3 or 4 minutes here and give us a chance to kind of popcorn style to throw some of these images out. So I gave some examples using the M metaphors, but when you were a child, what images of God were presented to you? By your parents, by your teachers, by peers, popular culture? Does anybody want to throw out some of your common images? And let me hear you so I can repeat it out loud for the group.
Santa Claus God.
Santa Claus God.
You got to be good enough to get into heaven.
Yep.
And if you don't, you're going to hell.
Exactly. So the Santa Claus God, up in the sky, bearded white guy, watching over everything we do. Yes. Okay.
White old guy.
White old guy. Oh, thank you. Wise old guy. Okay. That's an increase, a good difference. So wise old guy, sometimes sitting on a cloud or a throne, maybe next to us. Yes. Okay, the fingers touching each other. So Da Vinci, the painting. Okay, good. Another one? What a friend I have in Jesus. So a song, a punishing God, I think I heard. Yeah.
Same thing. Punishing, always watching.
Always watching. I have to tell you, my son was like 9, and he's like, Mom, God is kind of creepy. If he's like Santa Claus, like watching over you, seeing if you're good or bad, up in the sky. I was like, oh, I had never thought of it that way. So that's, leave it to the 9-year-old to tell us how our God images are working on us. Other images? Yeah.
Far away and disinterested.
Far away, disinterested. Yep. Some of us have heard that. Other
Here to help us.
The accountant. Okay, so keeping track of things.
Here to help us.
Here to help us.
God
Yep.
is always available.
Always available. You can always call on God. Always present.
Judge.
A A shepherd who shepherds. Yeah, I was sharing with John, we just got sheep last summer, so I'm like, yes, I love the shepherd image now. Yeah.
A God who is so far up that you are tiny and worthless.
Great. So God is so far and big that you're like a little tiny ant that's worthless on the ground, okay?
You need to earn and prove yourself.
Sure. So that sense of earning your worth before God, okay? Yeah, another image.
Where I grew up, it was a loving, healing God.
Yeah, lovely. I'm so glad you grew up with that environment. Good, good. Loving, healing. Any specific images? Was it Jesus? Was it Father? Was it Mother? Was it
It was always paternal.
paternal? Yep, so a loving Father. Good, good, good. Yeah, what else?
And the opposite of that, every time we did something wrong, we're pounding another nail into Jesus' hands.
Oh dear, okay, so the image of everything you do wrong is a direct consequence of having another nail pounded into Jesus' hand, so, yes, yes. Okay, so we've got a lot going on here, don't we? Whole spectrum, lots of layers, millennia of human beings trying to make sense of this mystery, right? So then another interesting thing then is to think about one way of the shifting. So these are the things that we were taught and told, but did it shift at all when we became adults with some empowerment and some agency, possibly, the ability to think and reflect? So as an adult now, what are some of the images that you use when you pray to God?
Patient father.
A patient father, lovely, glad to hear it. Uh-huh.
Mother, father, God.
Mother, father, so letting the two do work together, all right?
I did the divine feminine.
The divine feminine, okay? What else? Yeah.
Loving presence.
A loving presence, okay?
Companion.
A companion, lovely. Right here.
God is in me and I am in God.
God is in me and I am in God, lovely.
The relationship that God had to Sophia, like she played with him, or she
Sure.
entertained him. Or
Yes.
she
So
helped him
Sophia
have
as a
time.
playful partner,
Yep.
playmate, yep, lovely. Uh-huh.
With a known path.
A known path, yep, so the sense of guidance, yep, assurance, uh-huh.
Grandmother.
A grandmother, lovely, yeah.
A loving God.
A loving God, good. Okay, over there.
Reality itself.
Reality itself with a big R. Wonderful, so yummy. Now let me go over here and then I'll come back, huh?
An awesome God that created the whole universe.
Awesome God created the whole thing, all the stuff. Yep, thank you, the whole
A
universe.
life pattern of suffering, death, and resurrection.
Okay, a pattern, in Christian language we call it the Paschal Mysteries, suffering, life, death, and resurrection. Mhm. Good, one more here, uh-huh.
I'm a little confused.
Okay.
To pray to, am I praying to the awesome God of everywhere? Or am I praying to the God who walked the earth?
Yes, so some confusion. How do I hold the tension? I'm going to add a paraphrase for you. The awesome God everywhere, or that one incarnate guy that was walking on the earth, right? Okay, so big tension there. We're going to hold that tension. Okay, one more.
This is a position, but God is becoming.
God is becoming. Mhm. Way to undo all those Greek omni qualities. Did you have something I didn't? No, you didn't. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, one more. Yes.
The ever-present helper.
The ever-present helper. Lovely. Yeah. Good. Well, again, lots of images, mixed bags here. What I'd like to point to, if you look at the bottom of that same handout, just some concepts here, so we have some common language. It goes back to what Janet taught me. So our espoused theology is our concept of God, what we say we believe about God. So if we're thinking about God, conceptualizing God, our espoused theologies tend to be cognitive and creedal, right? So beliefs. And these are our ideas about God. Turns out you can live an entire life talking about God and not ever actually pray with God. And so that's where we get that tension of the operational theology. So I distinguish kind of arbitrarily between a concept of God and an actual image, as in that specific particular thing. So our operational theology focuses on your image of God and how you relate to God. Generally, your operational theology is going to be affective rather than cognitive, relational rather than creedal, and it focuses more on your actual interactions with God than your ideas about God, right? So can you see how these two feed each other all the time, right? I often have, actually, let's see, I think it's on the bottom of the next page. So if you flip over there, we're not going to talk in a lot of detail about all these yummy, fun categories. My theology teacher brain gets all excited about transcendence and immanence and cataphatic and apophatic and all the fanciness. But I often point to this triangle on the bottom, which is part of some work I do on contemplative dialogue, which is kind of practically like what goes in has to come out, right? So our personal interactions, what we're told about God sort of goes into a bucket, and then we work it a little bit with our life experience, and then something else may or may not come out. And so there's kind of a cyclic nature of life experience, our own prayer, our own ideas, that kind of cycle around in the relationship between God, self, and others. And so as we're pointing to at the bottom of that box, the shifts in God image are a natural part of our spiritual development. They're ongoing and they're dynamic. Sometimes when teenagers start asking questions about God, the adults in the room get all nervous, like, oh no, they're doubting their faith, their life is going to fall apart. And I get really excited because I'm thinking, yes, God is nudging you, God is saying, open the box, right? And so it's actually, I get more worried about people who have had the same image of God forever and ever and ever and a day than not ever having an openness to new images. But the idea here is that our human relationships impact our God relationship, and then how we image God affects how we treat others. Does that make sense to people? It's kind of conceptual. Okay, good. So as long as it makes sense, I think what I might do is just offer a couple of examples. So in the transcendent immanent category, sometimes one way to think about this is God, on the one hand, is ultimate and intimate. I like to use those more informal words to think about the tension between transcendence and immanence. So ultimate and intimate. So God is always more, but God is also closer to me than I could be to myself, is what we sometimes say. Similarly, that tension between God being knowable and unknowable. Thomas More talks about these as the alternations of God. Paul Tillich calls them the oscillations, this idea that God communicates God's self and reveals God's self, desires to be known, just look outside the creation, and then God is silent, and God conceals God's self, and God seems like God cannot be known, right? And so that tension often shapes us quite dramatically over the course of our lives as well, the knowable and unknowable qualities of God. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to get you all into thinking more about your own stories, and I'll give us a little kickoff here by just doing a little bit more personal reflection. When I was in my early 20s, I mentioned a little earlier that whole going to college thing and studying theology and peace studies. I didn't have a name for it at the time, but when you get to a certain stage in life, you get to have a midlife crisis. Well, I had the quarter life crisis, right? So at 25, 20, I was having a quarter life crisis. And as I mentioned earlier, those studies turned my whole worldview upside down. And it was very tightly or closely attached then to my sense of the sacred, to my sense of God. So those anthropomorphic, those very human-centered images of God, you know, the bearded guy in the sky, the different images of Jesus, even the images of Mary in different Catholic kinds of ways, those images that were very personal and very tangible and touchable in my childhood, and to whom I was, by the way, regularly praying faithfully to, like twice a day in my journals, were no longer helping me make sense of the world and navigate my place in it. So in that big time of upheaval, the images just stopped working, I guess is the best I could say. And at the time, I was starting to sense the sacred in new and different places, but they seemed quite unconventional and outside of the box. And frankly, those shifts in my prayer and in the images of God kind of freaked me out a little bit. In this particular time, like I mentioned, it had been a while since I had regularly prayed to that God of my childhood. I did eventually get a degree at St. Ben's and St. John's. I didn't turn my life so much upside down that I couldn't function anymore. But I managed to get out of college, lived abroad for a year, It was just a few years later, I was still struggling quite a bit with a regular life of prayer, as I mentioned. I was doing my master's degree studies at Creighton University in Omaha. So I was living during the summers in the dorm room, and I'm sitting outside on a blanket reading the classic spiritual direction book, Barry and Connolly, Spiritual Direction. And while I'm reading, the wind blows the corner of my blanket up. I'm a little bit more type A then even than I am now, so very precisely and neatly put it back down. Kept reading, Barry and Connolly. The wind blows again. Blows the corner of my blanket up. A little bit agitated, but I, dutifully put it back down again. And then a few minutes later, a third time, the wind blew the blanket up. And I go, fine, I see you. And I jump out loud, talking to God again. I'm like, wait, it's been so long since I've talked directly to you. But it wasn't the same guys that I was talking to. It was the wind. It had been a long time since I spoke directly to the divine. And I had, let a lot of my prayer forms and my images of God fall apart. And part of that process of breaking up was that I didn't know how to address God anymore or how to be addressed by God. So the good thing about God is that God meets us exactly where we are and helps us figure these things out when we're not able to figure them out for ourselves. So that God of my childhood who, and mind you, I can still return to that now. I've recovered from some of those images earlier. But this presence somehow was showing up in the wind. And as I mentioned earlier, what am I going to tell my theology professors? Isn't this like pantheism or something, ugh. And then I had a mom who was worried about all the money that we'd invested in this education, and so how am I going to tell her that God's talking to me in the wind now? And that the studies themselves have caused this crisis of faith. So part of what I was able to work out over time is that God of my youth was stuck in a single, increasingly irrelevant image. And letting go of that earlier image meant that I had to consent to that path of unknowing. I had to let the forms and the images go for a while, right? So it was a long haul to not feel like I knew, even as I was desperately desiring a life of prayer, how to talk to God and how to let God talk to me. So very difficult to navigate that new prayer terrain without those familiar forms. And yet, as I grew and matured, let God keep up with me or me up with God, I discovered that God was way more than capable of reading me every inch along the way, right? So letting go of that narrow, limiting image of God as strictly personal, it shifted the whole relationship for me. As a person, God was easily objectified, kind of as something that I could project my inner world out onto, which was good and healthy for a long time. But as a relational God, so I shifted the language, God is personal, God is relational, then God became the Holy One. Both beyond me as mystery and deep within me as intimacy. And within that widened and deepened sense of the sacred, I could see, as I mentioned earlier, that the hand of the Holy One was indeed active and always and everywhere. I didn't have to wait for the one place or the one time or the right person, right? So everything could potentially address me in my prayer, especially if I opened myself up to that mystery. So letting God of a single personalized image opened up that myriad of manifestations, these with the capital M there, myriad of manifestations through which the Holy One speaks and acts. So if you're outside today and you hear a little whisper or you get a little nudge from the wind, you're in good company. So there's my story. What I'd like to do is follow our similar pattern here of using some of this as a little bit of fodder to think about your own experiences. And so give me 2 seconds to adjust my timelines. 2 minutes ahead of time. 2 minutes ahead of time. Somebody must be nudging us. Okay.
Silence.
Extra time for silence, exactly. So on the second sheet that we haven't looked at yet, in that second little set, you have a a title of Operational and Espoused Theology's Personal Reflection. And I want to give a fair amount of instruction here. This exercise is a little more structured than the earlier one was today. So as you come across each name or image for God, I invite you to kind of take them slow. Like give yourself a minute or two if you can on each of the images. And offer your attention to your inner reactions, the ones that happen right away when you read the name or the image for God, but also sit with it a little bit, almost like a lectio. And then the idea here is that you see the initial response, but you respond to the then prompt. So you'll see if God is da-da-da-da, then. If God is da-da-da-da, then. What we're trying to do is kind of flesh out the espoused theology and the operational theology, right? So that then is standing in as a symbol of, oh, the image or name of God has an actual consequence in how I treat others, in how I think of myself, in how I act with God. So the then is kind of this big holding space for the things that actually flow out of the concept of God. Does that make sense? So there's no right or wrong in that, just based on your own experience, sit with, if God is these things, then, and see what flows. Some of these might be brand new to you, some of them might be as old as dirt, but let's take a good 20 minutes for this. So, as I mentioned earlier, we'll hold silence for each other in the 20 minutes. And then I'd also like to just mention that we won't have a large group break in the schedule for the day until 3:20. So if you need one before then, now is a good time because I want you to actually be in your groups after we come back. So come back into this room, ready to get into your small groups again at 2:35. We've got just under 20 minutes. Okay. Blessings on your reflection.
To do it.